Everybody on the rocking seat had money down on how long she'd last. Not a lot, a hand's wages don't stretch to a lot, but enough that grown men leaned on the corral rail at dawn to watch a woman get told no. That's a thing about a dying ranch. When there's nothing left to hope for, men will make a small mean game out of the next stranger's disappointment, just to feel the shape of a thing going the way they expect for once. I kept the tally in my head the way I keep everything. Amos Teague, 40 years a cowhand, and somewhere along the road I stopped counting money and started counting what folks owe each other and never pay. That morning, the ledger in my skull was already writing her name down under turned away, and I'd have bet my own saddle on it. I'd have lost the saddle, because Holly's crane, who'd buried a son and 3 good men and most of his own soft parts in the same 2 years, opened his mouth to send her down the road, and she said one thing back to him. Just one. Quiet, like she wasn't even arguing, and I watched a hard man's face come apart and get put back together wrong, into something none of us had seen on him since the boy died. I've had a long time to think on what she said. I've had longer to think on what it cost her to say it. This is the part nobody bet on. This is the part I still owe. The gray stud killed a man on a Tuesday, and by Friday she was standing at our gate like the two things had an appointment to keep. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd been the one to write it down, not in the ranch books, those were Crane's business, but in the little water-swelled notebook I kept in my vest against my heart, where I set down the things the ranch books don't have a column for. Pete Dolan, through, neck. I didn't write more than that. There wasn't more that mattered. Pete had been with the rocking sea 11 years, longer than the drought, longer than the boy, and the gray horse broke him against the top rail of the round pen in the time it takes a man to think I've got this one figured. We buried him on the rise with the others, and I put a mark by his name in my head under the column I never showed anybody, the one that just says paid in full. That's the quirk of me, if you want to call it a quirk. I keep accounts, not of dollars, of what's owed. My hands are too knotted now to rope worth a damn. I fidget with a bent horseshoe nail I've carried so long it's gone smooth as a river stone, turning it over and over between 2 fingers that don't straighten anymore, but my head still keeps its columns clean. Who owes who? What got paid and what never will? It's a poor man's religion. It's the only one I've got. So Tuesday the gray, Friday the woman. Drought had the country by the throat that year. Arizona Territory, the summer of '87, the year the ground cracked open in patterns like something was trying to climb up out of it. The San Pedro had gone to a string of green pools you could step across, and the grass on the rocking sea had cured brown standing up, never got the chance to grow tall enough to lie down. Our cows were walking racks of bone. Every dawn I'd ride the north fence and count the ones that hadn't got up, and every dawn the number was worse, and every dawn I'd add it to the tally and think, Hollies, you old fool, this ain't a ranch anymore, it's a funeral you keep paying to attend. But I didn't say that. You don't say that to a man like Crane. You watch his jaw and you keep your own shut. She came up the wagon road on foot in the flat white heat of midday when no sensible traveler moves. That was the first thing. The second thing was she wasn't dressed for begging. She had a man's canvas coat too big in the shoulders, a wide, flat-brimmed hat gone the color of the road, boots that had walked a great deal further than the horizon we could see. And she was Apache. I want to say it plain because everybody else that day said it behind their teeth, said it like a verdict, she's Apache, as though that settled the whole matter and there was nothing left to do but pronounce sentence. You have to understand what that word carried that year in that country. It hadn't been a full 12 months since Geronimo went to the trains at Bowie, since the whole Chiricahua people, women, children, the old, the ones who'd never lifted a hand, got loaded up and shipped to Florida in cattle cars for the crime of having been born who they were. There were men on the rocking sea who'd ridden with the volunteers. There were men who'd lost kin, or said they had, in the years of raiding and reprisal that don't sort neatly into who started what. Feeling ran high, and it ran ugly, and it ran without much care for who deserved it. To half our outfit, an Apache at the gate wasn't a person looking for work. It was a ghost that had wandered up out of a war everyone wanted to pretend was over. They came off the bunkhouse porch to watch. Young Cormac and the Halloran brothers and fat Willie Prout, wiping their hands, grinning that grin men grin when they've decided in advance how a thing will go and they're just there to enjoy the going. Cormac made the first bet before she'd even reached the yard. 2 bits she's off the place inside the hour. Willie took it, laughing, said give her 10 minutes, Crane'll smell her coming. There was money on the porch rail before she'd said a word. I didn't bet. I want that in the record. Not because I was any better than them, I'd already written her down as turned away same as they had, but because I never bet on a sure thing. There's no honest profit in it. She stopped at the gate and she waited. Didn't come through. Didn't holler. Just stood with the sun on her and waited for someone to come to her, which is a thing that takes more nerve than walking in, because walking and you're moving, you've got something to do with your body, but waiting, you've just got to stand there and be looked at. She stood there and got looked at, and didn't so much as shift her weight. Crane came out of the house. He came slow, the way he'd come to move since the boy, like a man walking through water only he could feel. Holly's Crane was maybe 50 then and looked 70, a big-framed man gone gaunt, gray stubble, eyes the pale of a winter sky and about as warm. He'd built the rocking sea up from nothing across 30 years, and in the last 2 he'd watched the drought and the market and the plain rotten luck of the world take it apart faster than he'd put it together. His wife had died the way ranch wives die, worn down to nothing by the country, years back. And then Toby. I'll get to Toby. Everything on that ranch got to Toby eventually, like water finding the low place. Crane stopped a few feet inside the gate and looked at her the way you'd look at a bill you weren't going to pay. "We're not hiring," he said. Which was true in the sense that Crane didn't have money to hire, and a lie in the sense that we were 3 hands short of what the place needed even dying, and the gray horse had just put us down another, and every man on that porch knew we'd have hired the devil himself if he'd work for keep and could sit a horse. We weren't hiring because we couldn't pay. But that's not what Crane meant, and that's not what she heard. What Crane meant was not you. What she heard was the porch behind her, the money on the rail, the grin she couldn't see but surely felt. "I heard," she said, "down at the Bowie Road. I heard the rocking sea lost a man to a gray stud can't nobody ride." Her voice was low and even and carried no music of asking in it. She spoke English clean, better than half the men on that porch, with just a shape to it underneath, the shape of a first tongue that wasn't this one. She didn't look at the porch. She kept her eyes on Crane. "That's ranch business," Crane said, "not yours." "I can ride him." Willie Prout laughed out loud. Somebody on the porch said something I won't write down about what an Apache woman was good for and it wasn't horses, and there was a rumble of that low porch laughter that's meaner than any shout. Crane didn't turn around, but I saw something cross his face, not for her, for them, a flicker of distaste, quick and gone. Even at his lowest, Crane hated a mob. It was one of maybe 3 things left I still respected about him. "Every drifter that comes through says he can ride the gray," Crane said. "Then the gray rides him. I just buried a man knew more about horses than you've been alive. Go on now. There's water at the tank, take what you need for the road, but there's nothing here for you." That was the moment, right there. He'd said the words that end it, "Go on now," and by every law I understood, the next thing that happens is she turns and walks back down the road, and the porch collects its bets, and the ledger in my head closes her account. She didn't turn. She looked past Crane for the first time, out toward the round pen where the gray stood at the far rail with his head up and his nostrils working, that big, ugly, beautiful, killing animal, 16 hands of trouble the color of a thunderhead. She looked at him a long moment. Then she looked back at Crane, and she said the thing. "I've turned it over more times than I've turned this nail. I'll set it down exactly. You don't need a man who's not afraid of that horse," she said. "You've had those. You buried one Tuesday. What you need is somebody who's got nothing left that horse can take from them." Quiet, she didn't raise her voice. She said it the way you'd state the price of grain. "And that's me, Mr. Crane. I've already lost everything a horse could break me over. So he's got no leverage. That's the only thing that rides a killer, not being braver than him, having less to lose." The porch went silent. I want you to understand what silence means on a ranch full of loud men. It doesn't come cheap. And it didn't come because she'd insulted anybody or made a threat. It came because she'd said, in front of God and the outfit, the truest thing anybody had said out loud on the rocking sea in 2 years. That fear is just the weight of what you're scared to lose, and a person carrying nothing can't be tipped over. And she'd said it to a man who'd lost more than any of us, and every one of us knew it, and every one of us had been walking around that truth on tiptoe for 2 years pretending Holly's Crane was just tired. And Crane's face came apart. Not into tears, Crane didn't have those anymore, I don't think. They'd gone the way of the grass. It came apart the way a wall comes apart when the mortar's been failing a long time and one stone finally shifts. Just for a second. The hard set of his jaw, the flat winter eyes. For 1 second I saw all the way down into the man, into the thing he'd been holding shut since we lowered his boy into the rise, and what was down there wasn't anger and it wasn't grief exactly. It was recognition. She'd named him. A stranger, an Apache woman off the Bowie Road, had looked at Holly's crane and named the exact shape of the hole in him, out loud, kindly, without cruelty, and it undid him the way no comfort ever could have. He was quiet a long time, long enough that Cormac started to reach for the money on the rail, thinking it was over. "What's your name?" Crane said. It wasn't a question, the way he said it. It was a man reaching for a rope in the dark. "Naomi," she said, then after a beat like she was deciding whether he'd earned the rest. "My mother's people called me Nolan. It means the one who keeps walking through the storm." A ghost of something crossed her face. "I don't much use it anymore. Most that knew it are gone." Crane looked at her. Then he looked for the first time back at the porch, at the money on the rail, at the grins gone flat, at his whole grinning bankrupt outfit that had bet against her. And something came into his eyes that I hadn't seen in 2 years, and it took me a breath to place it because it was so out of season. It was spite. Pure, warming, contrary human spite. The same spite that'll make a beaten man get up one more time just to disappoint the crowd. "You start now," Crane said. "You get the gray to take a saddle and let you sit him by dark. You've got wages and a bunk. You don't, you're on the road at first light, and you've lost nothing you didn't come here without." He paused. "That's the deal I gave every man who tried before you. I'm not softening it because you're a woman, and I'm not hardening it either. It's the same deal. You wanted the same deal, didn't you?" "Yes," she said. And for the first time something moved in her face too, not gratitude. She was too proud for gratitude, and he'd have hated it. But a kind of grim recognition of her own, like two people who have each been walking a long time alone recognizing another walker on the road. "That's exactly what I wanted." She walked past him toward the round pen. And the porch, I swear this on Pete Dolan's grave, the porch got up and followed, all of them, Cormac and the Hallorans and Fat Willie Prout. The money forgotten on the rail, because nobody in this world can resist watching a person walk toward the thing that's going to kill them, on the outside chance that this time it won't. I followed too. I'm not above it. I turned my bent nail over in my fingers and I followed, and in the ledger in my head I crossed out, turned away, and I left the line blank, because for the first time in a long while I truly did not know how the account was going to run. She didn't fight the gray. That's the thing none of us expected, standing on the rail expecting a rodeo, a war, a woman thrown and broken like Pete. She went into the round pen slow, with her hat off. She left it on the rail, and I noticed her hair was cut short and ragged, cut with a knife, the way our women didn't cut theirs, and I didn't understand yet what that meant, and by the time I did I wished I hadn't asked, and she went in with nothing in her hands. No rope, no quirt. No blindfold, no war bridle. None of the ropes and rigs and cruelties that Pete and the men before Pete had tried to break that horse with and got broke by instead. She just stood inside the gate and let the gray look at her. He came at her once early, a bluff charge, ears flat, and every man on the rail sucked in breath, and she didn't run, and she didn't freeze. She just turned sideways, made herself thin, took her eyes off him and looked at the ground, and the charge died halfway because there was nothing for it to hit. You can't run through a person who won't be a wall. The gray pulled up, confused, snorting, and circled, and she circled with him, always sideways, always soft, never once looking him in the eye, and the whole pen went quiet with the strangeness of it. It wasn't breaking. I'd seen breaking. This was something else. This was two creatures, each of whom had decided the other might not be a threat, negotiating it out in the dust, one small yielding at a time. It took hours. The sun slid down the sky, and the shadows went long, and the men on the rail got bored and stopped being bored and got quiet again as the thing wore on past what any of us had patience for and into something like reverence. She never hurried. When the gray let her get close, she got close, and when he flared, she gave ground. No punishment, no pushing, just the endless patient arithmetic of I will not hurt you, and I will not leave. I have never in 50 years of this life seen anything like it, and I don't expect to again. Along about the last light, she got a hand on his neck. Then the saddle blanket, laid on soft and lifted off and laid on again, a dozen times till it meant nothing. Then the saddle, cinched loose, let stand, cinched again. And the gray, the killer, Pete's killer, stood for it, sweat dark and trembling but standing, because she'd never once given him a thing to fight. And when the first stars came out over the dragoons, she gathered the reins and put her weight in the stirrup slow, half her weight, all her weight, and swung up. The gray stood, She sat him in the dark in the round pen on a horse that had killed a man on Tuesday, and the horse just breathed and shifted under her and stood, and nobody on that rail made a sound, and I looked over at Holly's crane and there were tracks down through the dust on his face after all. So I was wrong about that too. He did still have those. He didn't say anything. He walked to the rail and he opened the gate for her himself, and she rode the gray out into the yard at a walk, easy, like they'd done it 1,000 years, and the men parted for her without a word, and that was that. Hired. In the ledger in my head, I opened her a new account, and I couldn't for the life of me decide which column to start her in. She'd earned her keep in an afternoon. She'd shamed a whole outfit and never raised her voice. And she'd told the exact truth about herself, out at the gate, and I was old enough and had kept accounts long enough to know that when a person tells you plainly I've already lost everything, that's not a woman with nothing left to lose talking. That's a woman with a debt in her too, one she means to pay. And I lay awake that night in the bunkhouse listening to the men who'd bet against her pretend to sleep, turning my nail over, running her account, and I thought, Amos, you old fool, you'd best find out what she owes and to who, because it followed her up the Bowie Road, debts always do. I found out, God help me, I found out. She'd been with us 3 weeks before I learned what she'd walked away from, and I learned it the way you learn most true things on a ranch, sideways, at night, over a job nobody wanted to do. By then the outfit had made its uneasy peace with her, of the kind men make when the evidence gets too heavy to argue with. She could ride anything with 4 legs and a bad idea. She could rope doctor a screwworm case with her sleeves rolled, sit a night watch without complaint, and read weather off the sky better than any of us. She'd call rain 2 days out when the sky was bare as a plate, and be right, and it near drove Cormac out of his mind. The men stopped calling her the Apache and started calling her Naomi, and then, when she'd pulled a heifer out of a bog single-handed that would have taken 2 of them, they started, grudgingly, calling her ma'am, which out of the mouth of a cowhand is a coronation. She kept apart, slept in the tack room she'd cleared out for herself rather than crowd the bunkhouse, which suited everybody, ate quick and quiet, didn't drink, didn't gamble, didn't tell stories around the fire. She'd sit at the edge of the firelight mending tack with those short, quick hands and listen to the men lie about their pasts, and never offer one of her own. And if you tried to draw her out, she'd give you 3 words and a look that closed the subject like a gate. But she watched Crane, and Crane watched her. Nothing improper, I want that plain. It wasn't that. They were both too scoured out for that. It was something stranger and sadder. It was 2 people who'd each been carrying a coffin so long they'd forgotten the weight, recognizing the way the other one walked. He gave her the hard jobs. She did them better than his dead men had. And in the doing of them, something in the ranch, I can't say it prettier than this, something in the ranch started breathing again. Not healing. It was too far gone for healing, but breathing. I learned her story the night we pulled the drowned cattle out of the North Draw. There'd come a freak storm, she'd called it, of course, 2 days early, and Crane had believed her enough to move the main herd off the low ground, which saved us the herd. But a bunch of yearlings had drifted back down into the North Draw in the night, into the one stretch of the rocking sea that Crane never spoke of and never rode, and the flash flood that came down out of the dragoons caught them there and drowned the lot. Come morning, there were 11 dead yearlings jammed against the fence at the bottom of the draw where the water had piled them, and they had to come out before they fouled the tank, and it was ugly, wet, stinking work in the mud, and Crane wouldn't come. Sent me and Naomi to do it, and wouldn't say why he wouldn't come, and I knew better than to ask. We worked into the dark, dragging waterlogged carcasses up the bank with a horse and a rope, and it was the kind of work that either makes men silent or makes them talk, and something about the mud and the dark and the reek of it loosened her. He lost his boy here, she said, not a question, she'd figured it, in this draw. I looped a fresh dally and didn't answer right off. It wasn't my story to give. But she'd earned something, hauling Crane's dead cattle out of Crane's cursed ground in the dark, so I gave it. Toby, I said, 2 years back, spring flood like this one, only worse. Bunch of cows got caught down here same as these, and Toby went in after him against his daddy's word. He was 19 and he thought he was going to live forever the way they do at 19. I dallied off and the horse took the strain and a yearling came sucking up out of the mud. Water took him. We found him 4 miles down against a cottonwood snag. Crane hasn't ridden this draw since. Won't fence it off, won't sell it, won't ride it. Just leaves it to drown things. She was quiet working. Then she said, that's why he hired me. He hired you 'cause you rode the gray. No, she wiped her face with the back of a muddy wrist. He hired me because I said the horse couldn't take anything from me that wasn't already gone. He hurt his own self in it. He's a man that's already lost the thing that mattered, walking around waiting for the rest to get taken too, and he saw another one of those walk up his road, and he couldn't turn it away because it would have been like turning away. She stopped. Like turning away his own self. People do that. Taken a stray that's carrying the same wound, so they don't have to feel like the only one bleeding. I turned my nail over in the dark. She wasn't wrong. She was never wrong about people, which I came to understand was its own kind of scar. You don't get to see that clear into folks without having been on the wrong end of a great many of them. You said out at the gate you'd lost everything, I said. It came out before I'd decided to say it. 3 weeks I've been wondering what that ledger reads. She was quiet so long I thought I'd overstepped and lost her. The horse blew and stamped. Down the draw the water still ran, softer now, the flood spending itself. Then she told me, flat even the way she'd priced grain at the gate. I'll set it down the way she said it, without dressing it, because dressing it would be a lie and she'd have hated a lie. She was Chiricahua, born in the Dragoons, the very mountains that stood black against the stars over our heads while we worked. That was the thing I hadn't understood, that we were pulling cattle out of the bottom of her own country, that Crane's cursed drowning draw was ground her people had walked for longer than there'd been a Crane or a rocking sea or a territory at all. She'd been a girl during the last of the wars. She'd had a husband, married young, the way they did, and a daughter, small, 2 years old the last spring anyone was free. And then the surrender and the trains. They loaded her people into cattle cars at Bowie, all of them, the ones who'd fought and the ones who'd never lifted a hand, women and babies and old men, and they shipped them east to rot in the Florida damp 2,000 miles from the only country their bodies knew how to live in. Her husband died on the way, of the sickness that went through the cars. Her daughter died the first winter in Florida, of the damp and the fever and the plain grief of a 2-year-old torn out of the light, in a place with no mountains, where the child had cried, she said, for the shape of the hills that weren't there and never would be. She kept asking where the mountains went, Naomi said, even flat, looking down the dark draw. She thought somebody had moved them, she was 2. She thought if I looked hard enough I could find where they'd put the mountains and take her home. The horse shifted. I couldn't find the mountains. I couldn't do the one thing. And then she was gone, and there was nothing in that flat, wet country to bury her, and that meant anything, and I. She stopped, she didn't cry. I almost wished she would. There's mercy in it, and there was none in the dry, flat way she said it. She'd walked out. That's what the ragged knife-cut hair meant, cut in mourning, and never grown back to a woman's length because she'd never stopped mourning long enough to let it. She'd walked away from the Florida camp, which people did, a slow trickle of the desperate, most of them caught and dragged back or dead on the road. She'd walked and worked when she could pass, and walked, for the better part of 2 years, 2,000 miles, back across a continent that wanted her dead or gone, toward the only mountains her heart knew, the Dragoons, with no plan for what she'd do when she got there except stand in her own country one more time before she was done. She'd got as far as the Bowie Road. She'd heard about the ranch that lost a man to a gray stud at the very foot of her mountains. And she'd walked up Crane's Road to the gate and told a hard, grieving white man the truest thing she owned, and it had bought her 3 weeks of work at the bottom of her own drowned country, hauling out another dead man's cattle. The one who keeps walking through the storm, I said, her mother's name for her. The one she said she didn't use anymore. My mother had a sense of humor, Naomi said. She named me before she knew what the storm would be. I didn't have anything to say to that. There's nothing to say to that. I've kept accounts my whole life, and I sat there in the mud with the reek of drowned cattle in my nose, and I could not for the life of me find the column that squared what had been taken from that woman against anything the world could ever pay back. It doesn't balance. Some ledgers don't. That was the night I learned it, that there are debts the world runs up and simply never means to settle, and the keeping of accounts is a comfort a man tells himself, and the truest thing you can do about the great unpayable debts is not pretend they're anything else. We hauled the last yearling up in the dark and rode back to the house not talking, and I never told a soul what she told me, and I'm only telling it now because everyone in it is past the reach of my telling. The morally heavy thing came a week after. I've gone back and forth my whole life on whether she was right. I still don't know. I'll set down what happened and let you keep your own account of it. There was a boy came through. Chiricahua boy, maybe 14, half-starved, walking the same road she'd walked, one of the trickle that kept slipping out of the Florida camps and dying on the way home. He came to the ranch at night, to the tack room to her. They find each other. She told me later, the walkers, there's ways. And he was sick and spent, and he needed to lay up and eat and heal before he went on to the mountains, and every hour he was on the rocking sea was an hour Holly's crane could hang for. Because there was a bounty. That's the part I hate to write, but it's true. The army paid for camp runaways brought back. And harboring one, feeding one, hiding one on your land, that was a crime in the territory in that year. And there were men not 30 miles off who'd have ridden a posse onto the rocking sea and burned Crane out and called it patriotism for the pleasure of it. And Crane was already ruined, already one bad season from losing the place. And he had an outfit of men, and any one of them, Cormac, the Hallorans, fat Willie Prout who'd never forgiven her the 2 bits. Any one of them might see that boy and see money and a grudge paid at the same stroke. Naomi came to me, not to Crane, to me, the account keeper, because I think she needed one other soul to help her carry the weight of the sum, and she'd decided I was safe. She told me the boy was in the tack room. She told me what it meant. And she asked me a question I have not stopped hearing in 40 years. If I ask Crane to hide him, she said, and Crane says yes, and he'll say yes, Amos, that's the kind of ruined he is, he'll say yes to spite the whole world that took his boy. Then I've put the rope around Crane's neck to save one of mine. And if I don't ask him, if I take that boy and slip off in the night and don't tell anybody, then it's just me on the road again, and Crane never knows, and Crane's safe. And I've lost the one place that's taken me in and the one man who ever looked at me like a person since the trains. She looked at me. Tell me which one's the debt, Amos. You keep the accounts. Which one do I owe, the boy or the man who took me in? I want you to understand, she wasn't asking me to decide. She'd already decided. I saw it in her face. She'd decided before she came to me, and she was only asking so as not to be the only one who'd carried it. That's a mercy you can do a person, to help them hold a thing they've already picked up. You've already got the boy walking, don't you? I said. At moonrise, she said. Then you know which one you picked. I picked the boy. Her voice didn't shake. I picked the boy because Crane's got you, and the outfit, and a place in the world even ruined. And if the whole thing burns down, he's still a white man on his own land in his own country, and the law is at least a thing he can appeal to. And that boy's got nobody and no country and no law that'll hear him, and he's 14, and he's trying to walk home to mountains that somebody's guarding to keep him out of. Crane can lose the ranch and go on being. That boy can't lose one more thing and go on. So the debt's to the boy. I knew it before I came to you. And here, only here, her voice did something. I just didn't want to be the only one who knew I was leaving. Somebody ought to know I didn't sneak off because I was ungrateful. Somebody ought to keep the account straight that I loved this place, that I'd have stayed, that I'm not walking away from Crane, I'm walking toward the boy. There's a difference, and I need one living soul to know it. I have kept a great many accounts in my life, and that is the truest entry in all of them. I'll keep it, I said. My throat had gone to gravel. I'll keep the account straight, Naomi. I'll make sure Crane knows you'd have stayed. She gripped my knotted hand once, hard, with those quick, strong, morning-cut hands, and she was gone into the dark toward the tack room and the sick boy and the moonrise and the 2,000 miles of road that didn't want either of them alive. And I stood in the yard turning my nail over and thinking she was gone. That was the end of it. She'd walk off into her mountains with the boy, and I'd carry her account, and Crane would wake to an empty tack room and a hole in him where the second-to-last thing had been, and the rocking sea would finish dying on schedule. I had the account wrong again. I keep telling you I'm a poor bookkeeper. This is why. Because Holly's crane was standing in the dark by the corral. He'd heard, not all of it, enough. He'd come out to check the gray, the way he'd taken to doing at night since she taught him the horse wasn't a killer, only a frightened thing that had been handled by frightened men. He'd come out to stand with the horse in the dark the way lonely, ruined men will, and he'd heard the last of it, heard 14 and heard mountains that somebody's guarding and heard I'd have stayed. And he came across the yard toward me with a look on his face I hadn't seen since before Toby, and he said, "Where's she taking him?" Not a question a man asks who means to turn anybody in. I knew that voice. It was the voice of a man reaching for a rope in the dark, same as the gate, and I made the second real decision of that long year, and I have never once regretted it, whatever it cost. "Dragoons," I said. "On foot, boys sick. They won't make the high passes before the Army Road Patrol crosses their track at the Sulphur Springs Cut. You know that country better than she does, Hollies. You know that draw. I let it sit. You know a lot of draws. Crane looked at me a long moment in the dark. Saddle the gray and my roan, he said. And Amos, you never saw us, any of you. There was a boy and there was never a boy. You keep that account. I'll keep it, I said for the second time that night. And I have until now. That's the morally heavy thing. She chose the boy over the man who saved her. And the man who saved her, given the same weight to carry, chose the same as her, chose the boy, chose the risk, chose to put his ruined neck in the noose for a stranger's child. Because a woman off the Bowie Road had once told him the truth about himself at his own gate, and he'd spent 3 weeks remembering what it was to be a man who could still lose something on purpose, for a reason, instead of just having things taken. They rode out before moonrise, the two of them and the sick boy up behind Crane on the roan, into the black bulk of the dragoons, into Naomi's own country, toward the guarded passes. And I stood in the yard till the sound of the hooves was gone, and I did not know if I would ever see either one of them again. And I turned my smooth, bent nail over and over in my knotted fingers, and I found that for the first time in 2 years I was praying, which I'd long since quit, and I couldn't have told you to who. They were gone 6 days. 6 days is a long time on a dying ranch with your boss, and your best hand both vanished into the mountains, and a 14-year-old fugitive between them and the whole apparatus of the United States Army looking to make an example. 6 days I ran the rocking sea and lied to the outfit, Crane's off to Wilcox on stock business, took Naomi to translate a horse trade with some Mexican dealers, back directly, and the men half believed it and half didn't, and Fat Willie Prout watched me too close, and I kept the account of who I'd have to worry about if it came apart, and Willie was top of that column, and I knew it. On the 3rd day, a road patrol did come through. 6 troopers and a sour lieutenant looking for exactly what I was hiding, asking exactly the questions I'd been dreading. Had we seen runaways? Chiricahua off the reservation headed for the dragoons. There'd been a boy reported. I stood on the porch and I lied to the United States Army with my whole chest. And I wanted in the record that Fat Willie Prout stood right there beside me and lied to Willie, who'd bet against her at the gate and never forgiven her the 2 bits and grumbled about her for 3 weeks. Willie put his thumbs in his belt and told that lieutenant we'd seen nothing but dust and dead cows all summer, and if the Army wanted to be useful, they could bring rain. And after the patrol rode off, Willie spat in the dust and wouldn't look at me and said, "She pulled my nephew's kid out of the Gila bog last spring. The Prout boy didn't tell nobody. I heard about it after from the boy's ma." He spat again. "A person does a thing like that and doesn't brag on it, you don't sell 'em to no lieutenant. Whatever she is." And he walked off to the barn and never said another word about it, and I moved Willie in the ledger from the column I'd worried about to a different column entire, and I felt ashamed of how wrong I'd kept his account all those weeks. People will surprise you. That's the one entry I've never been able to close in 50 years. People will surprise you right up to the end. On the 6th day, Crane came back. Alone, on the roan, leading the gray with an empty saddle, and my heart went down into my boots at the sight of that empty saddle, because I did the arithmetic a man does, and I got the worst answer. I got it wrong, I keep telling you. He rode into the yard at dusk, gray with exhaustion, and he got down slow the way he moved, and he stood a moment holding the gray's empty saddle, and then he looked at me across the yard, and he said the thing I've carried longest of all. "She stayed," he said. I didn't understand. "Boy made it," Crane said. "We got him over the Sulphur Springs Cut in the night. Patrol crossed our back trail not 2 hours behind, never saw us. Got him up into the high country, into the dragoons, into her mountains." He ran a hand down the gray's neck. "There's people up there, her people. The ones that never went to the trains, the ones that slipped the net and been living wild in that high country all this time, a few families hiding. She knew where. She'd been walking 2,000 miles to reach 'em and never let herself hope they were real. They're real. We found 'em." His voice, God help me, cracked. "Amos, they knew her. An old woman up there, she'd known Naomi's mother. She took one look at that ragged hair and she knew the whole story without a word, and she—" He stopped, composed himself the way he had to. "They took the boy in, and they'd take her. She's home, Amos. 6 days I walked her home to the only place left on this earth she belongs, into the arms of the last of her own people in the last free corner of her own mountains. She's not coming back. She's not a runaway up there. She's not the Apache at the gate. She's not my hand. She's home." He looked at the empty saddle, and I understood at last why it was empty, and why he'd brought the gray back at all. I couldn't ask her to come back down out of that to punch cattle for a ruined old man. I've taken enough from that woman's people to last 10 lifetimes. I wasn't going to take her too. He handed me the gray's reins. She said the horse was mine now, he said. Said she'd trained him to me these last weeks on purpose, so I'd have something come out of it that wasn't grief. Said, and here Holly's crane, who I'd have sworn had no tears left in the whole drought of him, stood in his own yard and let them come, silent, down through the gray dust of 6 days' hard riding. She said to tell you the account square, Amos. Said you'd know what she meant. Said you kept it straight, and it's square, and you can close it. I couldn't close it. I stood there in the dusk holding the reins of a killer horse that a dead people's daughter had gentled into a gift, and I could not for the life of me close that account, because it doesn't square, it never squared. She'd walked 2,000 miles through a debt the world ran up against her and never paid, and the best that all our striving had managed was to walk one sick boy and one broken woman home to the ruins of what should never have been taken in the first place. That's not squaring, that's just refusing to add to the pile. Sometimes that's all that's on offer. Sometimes not making it worse is the whole of what a person gets to do. But I said, I'll close it, to Crane, because he needed me to, the way she'd needed me to keep it. And keeping the account and closing it were both just ways of holding a weight for somebody who couldn't set it down alone. The rocking sea didn't die that year. That's the part that still surprises me. The rains came in the fall, she'd have called them a week out. I kept expecting her to, kept looking at the bare sky and thinking she'd know, and the grass came back the way grass does, indecently, like it had never heard of drought, and the cows that had lived put on flesh, and Crane sold enough in the spring to make his note, and then some. The place breathed, more than breathed. Some seasons it near sang. And Crane changed. Not all at once and not all the way, grief doesn't refund like that, but he'd been walking through water since Toby, and after the 6 days in the mountains he walked on dry land again. He rode the North Draw, first time in 2 years. Rode down to where the water took his boy and where we'd hauled the drowned yearlings, and he sat the gray down there a long while alone, and when he came up he had them fence it and turn it to a horse pasture, good ground, living ground, instead of leaving it to drown things. He said Toby would have wanted the ground used. He was probably right. He'd stopped somewhere up in those mountains, being a man waiting for the rest to get taken. He'd remembered you can give a thing away on purpose, for a reason, and that it's a different weight entirely than having it torn out of you. That was her doing, all of it. The gray, the draw, the man. She rode up his road one white afternoon with nothing and everything gone, and she gave the rocking sea back its breath and asked nothing but a bunk and the same deal as the men. And then she gave that back too and walked into the mountains, and I never saw her again. But I heard. Years on this'd be the 90s, the country gone quiet. The war's a thing men lied about in saloons. A stock detective came through, the kind that rides the high country, and over coffee he mentioned the wild Chiricahua families that still lived up in the Dragoons where the army had mostly quit trying to root them out. And he mentioned, not knowing he was handing me the last entry in an account I'd carried 20 years, a woman up there. Older now. Ran a string of horses better than any man in the territory, he said. Gentled the wild ones nobody else could touch, some trick of patience nobody could learn off her. And she'd raised a boy, took him in half dead off the road years back, folks said, raised him like her own, and the boy was grown now, married with a little girl of his own. A little girl. The detective didn't know why the old cowhand across the fire had to get up and go stand out in the dark a while. I didn't tell him. Some accounts you keep to yourself. But I stood out under the Dragoons that night. You could see them from Crane's porch, black against the stars, her mountains, the shape her daughter had cried for in the Florida damp. The shape somebody had moved, and she'd walked 2,000 miles to prove they hadn't really moved it at all. And I turned my smooth, bent nail over in my ruined old fingers, and I did the arithmetic one last time. Husband gone, daughter gone. A people loaded into cattle cars for the crime of being born. 2,000 miles of road that wanted her dead. All of that in the debit column, in the great unpayable column, and nothing the world would ever set against it. And then in the far corner of the ledger, in the small human column that doesn't balance the big one and was never meant to, a ranch that breathed again. A hard man who learned to give a thing away. A boy walked home. A boy grown. A boy married. A little girl up in the free high country in the mountains, playing in the light with the hills all around her right where they'd always been. I never could close the account. Some don't close. But I'll tell you what I did that night, 20 years too late and knowing she'd never hear it. I took my knife and I cut a line in the porch rail of the rocking sea, one clean line, the way you'd cut a tally. Not for a debt paid. There wasn't one paid. For a debt walked, the whole long, unpayable weight of it carried on foot across a continent by one woman who kept walking through the storm exactly like her mother named her, and set down at last, not squared, never squared, but set down, in the one place it could be set. And under my breath to the mountains, to the girl in the light I'd never see, to Naomi who was home, I said the only entry I had left.